The book of Daniel stands as a cornerstone of prophetic and historical literature in the Old Testament. Its narrative, set during the Babylonian captivity, intertwines history, prophecy, and personal devotion. Daniel 1 provides a significant introduction to the book, not only presenting historical events but also setting the stage for the spiritual and moral challenges faced by Daniel and his companions. During the time of Daniel, the Babylonian Empire, led by King Nebuchadnezzar, had besieged Jerusalem, leading to the first wave of Jewish captives being taken to Babylon in 605 BC. Daniel and his companions were among these captives. The Babylonians had a policy of assimilation, which was the reason behind the training in language and culture mentioned in Daniel 1. They sought to incorporate the best and brightest young people from the lands they conquered into their court to serve the king and ensure loyalty. However, this assimilation included attempts to erode the captives' religious and cultural identity. Verse 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon came to Jerusalem and besieged it. This places the events of the chapter in a specific historical context. Nebuchadnezzar's attack on Jerusalem in 605 BC marked the beginning of the Babylonian captivity. It's during this siege that Daniel and his companions were taken to Babylon. Verse 2. The Lord gave Jehoiakim king of Judah into his hand, with part of the vessels of the house of God, and he carried them into the land of Shinar to the house of his God. And he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God. This sets the stage for the spiritual and cultural clash between the Jewish captives and their Babylonian captors. The plundering of the temple and the artifacts signifies the dominance and triumph of the Babylonian gods over the God of Israel, as perceived by the Babylonians. Verse 3. The king spoke to Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring in some of the children of Israel, even of the royal offspring and of the nobles. Here we see the beginning of Nebuchadnezzar's assimilation policy, which aimed to incorporate the best and brightest of the conquered lands into his court, to serve him. It was a method of ensuring loyalty, as well as incorporating knowledge and expertise from various regions into his own court. Verse 4. Youths in whom was no blemish, but well-favored and skillful in all wisdom, and endowed with knowledge and understanding science, and such as had ability to stand in the king's palace, and that he should teach them the learning and the language of the Chaldeans. The 3-year training period aimed to ensure that those who served in Nebuchadnezzar's court were thoroughly indoctrinated in Babylonian language, culture, and politics. It was a form of assimilation, eroding the cultural and religious identity of the captives. Verse 5. The king appointed for them a daily portion of the king's dainties, and of the wine which he drank, and that they should be nourished 3 years, that at its end they should stand before the king. This verse introduces another facet of the Babylonian assimilation policy. Daniel and his companions were to be fed from the king's table, a symbolic act of assimilating them into Babylonian culture and eroding their Jewish identity. Verse 6. Now among these were of the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Here we are introduced to Daniel and his companions. It's important to note that their Hebrew names were changed to Babylonian names, which was a common practice in that time to help facilitate the assimilation process. Verse 7. The prince of the eunuchs gave names to them. To Daniel he gave the name Belteshazzar, and to Hananiah, Shadrach, and to Mishael, Meshach, and to Azariah, Abednego. Changing the names was not merely a matter of identification, it was a method of altering their identity, a way to assimilate them into Babylonian culture and religion. This was an attempt to erase their Jewish identity and to subjugate them to the Babylonian gods. Verse 8. But Daniel proposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the king's dainties, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Daniel is committed to his faith and dietary laws, even in the face of pressure to assimilate. It sets the stage for the tests of faith that Daniel and his friends will face throughout the book. Verse 9. Now God made Daniel to find kindness and compassion in the sight of the prince of the eunuchs. God was with Daniel, even in this foreign land. God is orchestrating events behind the scenes. ensuring that Daniel and his friends would remain faithful to him. Verse 10. The prince of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who has appointed your food and your drink. For why should he see your faces worse looking than the youths who are of your own age? So would you endanger my head with the king? The fear of the chief official to accommodate Daniel's request indicates the severity of the consequences of disobeying the king's orders. The decision to deny the king's food was not merely about personal preference, but a stand for their faith. Verse 11. Then said Daniel to the steward, whom the prince of the eunuchs had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Daniel is determined and committed to maintain his faith despite the circumstances. He continues to pursue an alternative that would allow him to remain faithful to God. Verse 12. Test your servants, I beg you, 10 days, and let them give us pulse to eat and water to drink. Daniel's request for a 10-day trial period indicates not only his faith, but also his wisdom. It wasn't an outright refusal, but a request for an alternative. This was a wise and diplomatic move, seeking a compromise. Verse 13. Then let our faces be looked on before you, and the face of the youths who eat of the king's dainties, and as you see, deal with your servants. Daniel's confidence that he and his friends would look better after 10 days on vegetables and water was a bold statement of faith. It also showed his faith in the Jewish dietary laws as being beneficial not just spiritually, but also physically. Verse 14. So he listened to them in this matter and proved them 10 days. The guard's agreement to Daniel's proposal emphasizes the presence of God's favor. It shows that even in this foreign land, God was working behind the scenes to ensure the faithfulness of his people. Verse 15. At the end of 10 days their faces appeared fairer, and they were fatter in flesh than all the youths who ate of the king's dainties. Daniel's plan is successfully implemented, highlighting Daniel's commitment to keeping himself and his friends undefiled. Verse 16. So the steward took away their dainties and the wine that they should drink, and gave them pulse. The physical outcome of the 10-day test not only vindicated Daniel and his friends' decision, but also demonstrated God's favor and blessing upon them. This was a significant victory not only for Daniel and his companions, but also for their faith in God. Verse 17. Now as for these 4 youths, God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. God bestowed divine favor on Daniel and his friends. God gave them wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, making them stand out among their peers. This divine favor becomes a recurring theme throughout the book of Daniel. Verse 18. At the end of the days which the king had appointed for bringing them in, the prince of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. This marks the completion of their training and the beginning of their service to the king, despite their faithfulness to God and their commitment to their beliefs. Daniel and his friends are also shown to be diligent and successful in their education and training. Verse 19. The king talked with them, and among them all was found none like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore stood they before the king. Nebuchadnezzar recognized their excellence and promoted them to his service, emphasizing that God's favor and blessing were upon them. Verse 20. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters who were in all his realm. We see again a reinforcement of the idea of God's favor and intervention. Daniel and his friends excelled in all that they did. This was a clear demonstration of God's power and sovereignty. Verse 21. Daniel continued even to the first year of King Cyrus. The chapter concludes by stating that Daniel's service continued throughout the reign of Nebuchadnezzar and into the reign of Cyrus the Persian. This points to the fact that Daniel's story continues, and he will serve in high positions under several successive kings, an indication of God's continued favor upon him. Daniel 1 sets the stage for the rest of the book of Daniel. Through historical narrative and theological discourse, this chapter introduces us to Daniel and his friends, showing their commitment to their faith despite the challenges they faced in a foreign land. It demonstrates God's faithfulness, favor, and sovereignty, not only over the Israelites, but also over the pagan kingdoms of the world. As we reflect on this chapter, we're invited to ponder the lessons it holds for us today. How do we remain faithful in the face of adversity? What compromises are we willing or not willing to make in our faith? We encourage you to like and share this video and leave a comment below, sharing your thoughts and insights on this powerful chapter of Daniel. Your involvement on our channel enriches our channel and our community. Let's continue to explore God's Word together and pray for God to show us His mercy and grace. God bless.